Now, of course, if we're going to calculate compound interest, in the previous video, we calculated compound interest by by calculating it for each year and then adding it, right? And of course, for 3 years doesn't seem as much, but what if we had to calculate it for 10 years or 20 years? So instead of doing all that, we actually have a formula, and that's the compound interest formula. Right. So compound interest formula, which is this. Essentially, it's this. Let's move this up. So pause the video, write it down, right? So A equals P, open bracket, 1 plus I, close bracket, n. So in other words, the final amount is equal to the principal times 1 plus the interest rate to the power of the number of compounding periods. So yeah, so A stands for the final amount. That means the amount that you're going to get after the time that you want to calculate the interest rate, the interest, after that, the amount of compounding periods, so it's the final amount of dollars that you get of your investment. P is the principal, or the initial amount, or the amount invested. Same thing, all these words, we got to get familiar with them. I is the interest rate, and just like this simple interest, we have to turn it into a decimal. And then N is the number of compounding periods. Okay, now one word, something important about these two, I and N, which is the following. And once again, you may want to pause the video to take notes. So that means that N is the number of compounding periods, and N must be multiplied by the number of yearly compounding periods. Okay, let's just mention this right now, and let me give you an example here. And I, very similar with I, which is the interest rate, must be divided by the number of yearly compounding periods. In other words, is this: when we talk about compounding periods, as you know, the word yearly or annually means once a year, means 1 year, right? So I suggest that below you create this table. So just watch what happens here. So in other words, you are all familiar with these words: annually, semi-annually, quarterly, and monthly. So annually means that you are calculating, as we said before, you are calculating the interest earned at least once a year, right? Annually means you're calculating the interest earned at least once a year. Semi-annually would mean, well, semi-annually means half a year, so that means you divide the year in half, so that means twice a year. Twice a year you are calculating the interest earned. Quarterly would mean 4 times a year, and monthly would mean 12 times a year. So keeping that in mind, keeping that in mind, whenever you get a problem that says compounded annually, or compounded semi-annually, or and so on and so forth, or compounded quarterly, or compounded monthly, you always have to make sure you do this to the variables of N and I respectively. So for example, if it says annually, you don't have to worry about I nor N. You just leave it as it is. But if it says semi-annually, that means you have to divide the interest rate by 2, and you have to multiply N by 2, right? Quarterly would mean you have to divide the interest rate by 4, then you have to multiply the terms by 4, okay, and so on and so forth. Monthly, divide by 12 for I, multiply by 12 for N. Okay, let's take a look at some examples on our next video.